Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? So we've been building up to this for a few weeks. We spent a little time checking out one of Thanos' earlier schemes, as well as the death of Thanos. And then we went through the Thanos quest, where Thanos was resurrected and went about achieving the Infinity Stones to further his goal of eliminating half of all life in the universe. All of this, of course, is building up to one of the biggest events of the 90s as we take a look at Infinity Gauntlet number 1. So just before we get into it, if you enjoy the channel, if you feel like you might want to help out a little bit, go subscribe to my Patreon. Links are in the description. Gives you early access to everything I do. Helps out the channel and helps to buy new comics. So the Infinity Gauntlet, like I said, one of the biggest events of the 90s. In my opinion, it is one of the biggest. At least that's how it stands in my mind. I kind of went around and looked like, were there other events in the 90s that kind of came close? It's like, well, depends on your point of view, I guess. The Clone Saga is apparently considered pretty close. I can't imagine having been invested in that. But hey, you can't account for taste. There's also, of course, the death of Superman, which is like, yeah, okay, I guess that was pretty big. And Nightfall. It's like, yeah, all right, fair enough. But it feels like the Infinity Gauntlet was the kind of thing that became so successful that it encouraged the big two to keep pumping out annual events, or pretty close to try and repeat the success. There had been these kind of big events before. Marvel had Secret Wars, and DC, of course, had Crisis on Infinite Earths, but those set out with particular goals. In the case of Marvel, it was to put out a toy line, really. And with DC, it was with the purpose of cleaning up all the insane continuity problems that they had throughout the years, which, of course, became sort of a regular tradition at DC. But the Infinity Gauntlet came about from the writer of The Silver Surfer. Back in 1988, I originally said it was Jim Starlin came up with the idea, and I read up a little more. That was incorrect. It was actually Steve Englehart, who was writing Silver Surfer at the time, and he wanted to come up with a storyline where Death brought back Thanos for the express purpose of thinning the herd, essentially. Death was out of sorts over the fact that the balance of life and death seemed to be out of whack, where life was starting to win the battle, and that kind of chafed her. So she brings back her most devoted follower in Thanos, and Thanos, with the goal of wiping out half the life in the universe, realizes he needs an incredible amount of power in order to do that, and he's going to go on a quest to go find the Infinity Stones, or as they're known at the time, the Soul Gems. And so we explained this idea to the editor-in-chief, Tom DeFalco. Tom DeFalco, of course, had no idea who Thanos even was, because nobody had used Thanos since he died back in 1977 in Marvel 2-in-1 Annual number 2. We checked that one out as well, if you want to go back and look at that. So he was excited about the idea, but he wanted to kind of build up to it as being a big summer event. Also, he wanted to extend an invitation to Jim Starlin, who, of course, created Thanos and was really the only creator who had worked on Thanos for any kind of extended period of time up until then. Starlin agreed and started writing Silver Surfer with number 34, where Thanos gets resurrected, and he would continue writing until issue 52, when the Infinity Gauntlet really starts picking up speed. And it's a pretty good story. It goes for a while. That's like more than a year and a half. And that doesn't even include the Thanos Quest, which was a 2-issue Prestige Edition series that was put out at the behest of the new owners of Marvel, which was Hasbro. They wanted big stories to have their own special sort of editions. And I also covered the Thanos Quest in another video if you want to check that out as well. So where we are now is Thanos has achieved ultimate power. He has collected all of the Infinity Stones and is coming to terms with being basically God. The first thing he does in Silver Surfer number 44 is to go back and find the Silver Surfer and gloat, because Thanos loves doing that shit. When Silver Surfer and Drax try to attack Thanos, Thanos sucks them into the Soul Gem, where they meet Adam Warlock and his friends like Pip and Gamora, because they've all been dead since 1977 too. The Surfer manages to escape the Soul Gem, and Adam Warlock decides to join the fight against Thanos. Apparently this was because another writer had thrown out the idea of using Adam Warlock and, I guess, Pip and Gamora in another storyline unless Jim Starlin wanted to use them instead. And Jim Starlin didn't think very highly of this particular writer's skills, so he's like, yeah, no, I'm totally using them. Thanks, though. The Surfer is warned by Mephisto, of all people, because Mephisto has actually joined Thanos as kind of his lackey, originally with the intent of stealing the Infinity Gauntlet for himself, but he found he couldn't actually wield it. It had some sort of elemental thing where he wasn't even really able to touch it, and then Thanos regained control, but still decided to keep Mephisto around because he decided he was useful and somewhat entertaining. This is a problem with Thanos that will keep recurring, where he keeps around people that could oppose him and put his plans in jeopardy because he thinks it's funny. So Mephisto advises the Silver Surfer to head for Earth, where he can find superheroes to help him oppose Thanos and hopefully bring him down. So that's exactly what the Surfer does. There's a couple of brief interludes. One where the Surfer goes to find Galactus in Silver Surfer number 48. It's a pretty cool little issue, actually. That's the first Silver Surfer issue I ever read. And gets Galactus to fix his soul because while he was in the Soul Gem, Adam Warlock was able to discern that Galactus had actually tampered with the Surfer's soul when he was Galactus's herald, in order to be able to go and annihilate worlds without it really hurting his conscience. So yeah, he goes back and gets Galactus to undo his handiwork. And then in Silver Surfer number 50, I really don't have a good enough reason to put this book in this video other than there's a lot of really cool looking stuff in this that I just want to kind of touch on real quick. First of all, really good cover. This is, of course, in the days when embossing and putting chrome on a cover was how you went about selling shit. But that's a pretty good cover. One of the better ones from Ron Lim. And there's some pretty cool stuff in this. This is basically Thanos fucking with the Surfer again. He does a fair bit of that leading up to the Infinity Gauntlet. But, like, there's some good spreads in this. And I love the treatment that they were able to come up with for Thanos. So in this, Thanos resurrects his old body, the one that was turned to stone and died. He kind of resurrects that as a sort of golem to go and waylay the Surfer and just, mess with him for a little bit. Find out a bit more about this guy who's supposed to be the big opponent to his reign. And it's just an interesting little backstory piece by Jim Starlin, of course, where Norrin Radd, he's raised on Zenla, and it's a scientist society, and his father's like this very esteemed scientist, but then Norrin finds out that for some great breakthrough, his father used a bit of somebody else's equation as a small part of his and didn't credit him properly, which is a big old no-no on Zenla. It's not quite Thomas Edison territory, but, I guess it all kind of depends on perspective. And this is a great shame for Norrin, of course, and he turns his back on his father, which ultimately leads to his father deciding his life wasn't worth living anymore, actually, which is pretty dark for the 90s. And then that leads directly into, of course, Norrin Radd offering his service to Galactus in exchange for sparing his world and becoming the Silver Surfer. And Thanos finds this whole thing hilarious. Because the Silver Surfer, of course, comes off as super honorable, super pure, and Thanos loves the idea of this would-be martyr having, some dark secrets in his past. But, like, the look of Thanos in this issue is just incredible. For one thing, I think Ron Lim is drawing him with a bit more shadow than he normally would, so he feels heavier. And then the inker goes in, and in addition to kind of playing that up, see, like, a bit more shadow everywhere, puts the cracks on him, puts the spatter on him to get the granite texture. And then the colorist as well. Just everything about Thanos in this issue looks amazing. So anyway, Surfer destroys the stone golem and then goes heading off for Earth so he can warn the heroes there about the impending doom. And smashes into the loft of Doctor Strange's house. And that's where he starts out in the Infinity Gauntlet. So let's get into this now. Now we're probably like 10 minutes into the video. So one of the big things about this, there are a lot of big things. Like, as events go, this thing was kind of a juggernaut. But, of course, since bringing back the original creator, Thanos, and, probably the guy who was best known for doing all that cosmic stuff in the 70s, they were also bringing in George Perez to do the pencils on this, which was a pretty big coup, I would imagine. At the time, the late, great George Perez was working at DC. He was doing Wonder Woman, writing and drawing that. But Jim Valentino actually found out that George Perez's contract DC was set to lapse in August and asked if he wanted to ink a cover of Guardians of the Galaxy, because that was the book he was working on. And George agreed. And then Jim passed this on to his editor. That editor passed it on to Jim Starlin, and Jim Starlin, I would think, probably shit his pants, and reached out to George to ask him if he wanted to draw this. And George agreed. And it was not a particularly happy working relationship, from what I understand. For one thing, George was I think he requested or was okay with full scripts for this because he wasn't really familiar with Marvel Comics at the time, like where exactly they were. In addition, Jim Starlin would usually give George Perez some suggested layouts for the issue, which George Perez would usually just discard. With Jim Starlin's blessing, but I think that got under Perez's skin as the series would progress. And then at the same time as this, he was still finishing up his run on Wonder Woman. And the combined strains of the two kind of got to him pretty quick, like in terms of stress. And he would eventually have to stop drawing the Infinity Gauntlet around the halfway mark, really. But we're a few issues away from that. We won't worry about that just yet. So let's start with the cover on this. This is, I think, probably one of the greatest comic book covers of all time. It's certainly one of the most recognizable. This is the kind of thing every single comic store, I think, had a poster of in the shop at one point or another. And once you see it, you can't help but get a little hyped for the pending event. There may have been a bit of a danger that maybe readers wouldn't know too much who Thanos was, because, like I said, there was a long period where Thanos wasn't in use, and when he did come back, it was primarily in the Silver Surfer comic book, which I'm sure not everybody read. But there was the Thanos Quest additional series as well, and Thanos was featured in the Marvel cards right around this time too. So I would think a large number of people who were reading comics at that time were probably buying the Marvel cards, and you're getting all these guys, and if you don't know who this one guy is, well, helpfully, the card tells you who he is and gives you a little bit of backstory. And of course, like I said, all the promotion in the world. But like the composition on this is kind of incredible to me. The idea of having the shinies on the gems be like panel borders pretty much, and then, featuring all the heroes that are going to be in this particular storyline. And the big ominous shot of Thanos' face here. It's just fantastic. And I think George Perez really went all out on this series, as much as he could anyway. Apparently, when they were drawing it, George Perez kept bugging Jim Starlin to throw in more heroes because he wanted to draw more stuff and really wow everybody. And I guess that would probably kind of contribute to his having to leave the book halfway through. So we start things off on a barren planet. Jim Starlin is going to take a little time building this up. Just kind of drilling it into our heads that the person that we're about to see is omnipotent, has absolute power. And you get the two sets of tracks leading towards us. Even this little splash is kind of impressive with the amount of detail in it. But this is going to get outshone by what else we're going to see in this issue. So, a pretty bold double-page splash to just have, the word God as a single page, as Thanos admires his handiwork, and Mephisto presents himself as a sycophant. But yeah, I didn't have this issue when I started collecting comics, either because this came out just before I started, because I got issue 2, or because all of the copies got picked up before I got to the newsstand, which seems a little bit more likely to me. But yeah, when I saw this, it's like, oh damn, really? We're just going to start off like that, eh? And Thanos is going to spend a fair amount of this issue just kind of expounding on the fact that he is now a supreme being. His divinity is something that he wants to talk about a lot and kind of just let everybody know. Because, of course, Thanos is a narcissist. He's a megalomaniac. He's kind of a classic villain. And as a guy who studied psychology in college when he was younger, Jim Starlin thought those were the best traits to have for a classic villain, I'm sure. So from there, we're going to cut to Doctor Strange with a really cool scene transition. All of the scene transitions in this issue, I think, are extremely good, like way better than they would normally need to be. Again, just George Perez taking big swing after big swing. And Stephen Strange is sitting in his house, and he's kind of going over his books. And there's one thing in particular. There's some recent reports of mass insanity in the Catskill Mountains that he's investigating and seeing if there might be a cause for that, when he hears a crash upstairs. And extremely detailed little foyer he's got here. I guess it's the dining room, something like that. George Perez is not going to skimp on backgrounds in this. So Doctor Strange heads upstairs with Wong and finds the Silver Surfer has crashed into his attic and brings grave news that Thanos has become a supreme being. And we get a little bit of backstory, which I think is necessary for this kind of thing. You can't just assume that everybody's been reading the Silver Surfer and Thanos Quest up to now. Or, maybe they've seen the promotion, but you still want to touch on everything. So he tells Doctor Strange about how death resurrected Thanos with the goal of eliminating half of all life in the universe. Nice sort of dissolve kind of effect here. where he put the image of death resurrecting Thanos inside the silhouette of the surfer's profile. Very nice shot. Cut from that back to Thanos, still hanging out with Mephisto, still talking about how he has unlimited power and how he can do whatever he wants. And he's going to start by blowing up the planet they're standing on. The whole thing. That's a pretty good planet explosion. Maybe not the best thing you're going to see, but I don't have any problems with that whatsoever. And Thanos and Mephisto, of course, survive the planet's explosion, and Thanos goes on to explain what's been going on with him to the reader. We get a nice little zoom in on the Soul Gem on the back of the Infinity Gauntlet, and from there we transition to the Infinity Well. Like I said, nice transition. And now we get a very brief rundown on how Thanos acquired all of the Infinity Stones. Again, he's just bragging to Mephisto, but we're going to get a short window into what it would have looked like if George Perez had drawn the Thanos quest. This stuff here, all pretty good, gives us what all the different stones are and who he got them from. This is fucking unreal. This is, I think, what you would want to see for something like representation of the Reality Stone. It's a little close in concept to some of the stuff that Ron Lim does. It's just a different level altogether when it comes to execution. And that's nothing on Ron Lim. It's George Perez. What the fuck are you going to do? But, incredible montage piece. I absolutely love this thing. And from there, back to the Silver Surfer with Doctor Strange. Oh, one thing, I should have actually mentioned who else was working on this. Because this thing, I imagine, took a fair bit of time to ink. So the other guys working on this are going to be Joe Rubinstein and Tom Christopher on the inks. Tom Christopher, I think, was the regular inker on the Silver Surfer at the time. He was the guy who inked that awesome Thanos statue in Silver Surfer number 50. We're also going to get Jack Morelli doing the letters and Max Shield doing the colors with Ian Lachlan. I just pointed out because I feel like everybody is bringing their A game on this, which is nice. From there, we get sort of an out-of-context page. This is a bit of a weird one. So this is just a page about a trio of scuzzy people who are on the run from the cops, talking about getting out of the state, maybe heading out up to Canada, and accidentally drive their car off a cliff and, presumably die. And that's kind of that whole thing. So this is building up to the trio from the Soul Gem, Adam Warlock, Gamora, and Pip the Troll, coming back to life. This is how that starts. This is interesting because it's completely out of context. It feels like the kind of thing that could have been slotted in anywhere in the issue, and maybe that's kind of what they did. It certainly doesn't feel like, it has to be right there. And then we're cutting back to the Silver Surfer at Doctor Strange's. Yeah, that feels a little out of place. So one slight misstep, that's fine. So the Surfer is going to explain to Doctor Strange exactly what his experience with Thanos has been since Thanos' return. And of course, Thanos has just been fucking with the Surfer for the last year and a half, really. He talks about how he and Drax were confronted by Thanos and attacked him, but unfortunately, they did it after he had acquired the Infinity Stones and he sucked their souls into the Soul Gem. Pretty good looking stuff. Nice inking on the, the bursts of shadow coming out in between the light. He talks about the Soul Gem and how it's basically heaven for a few souls anyway, and how they've got this spiritual leader there named Adam Warlock. And he assisted them in escaping the Soul Gem. And from there, the Surfer came straight here to warn Doctor Strange with a couple of short pit stops to get the shit beat out of him by some weird monkey dragon and, get his soul fixed by Galactus and get in a fight with a statue. So from here, we're going to cut back to Mephisto, who, of course, is hanging out with Thanos, and he's kind of marveling at how powerful Thanos has become and how easily he's wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, despite not really being like a cosmic being or some sort of deity or anything, or even a near deity, really. They teleport back to Mistress Death's lair, which Mephisto says even he hasn't ever dared to go to, which is an interesting little touch. And Thanos comes in, he's like, "Hey, baby, you're not still mad that I tricked you a little bit and went and got the Infinity Stones first? You're not mad about that, right?" And Death turns her back on him because of course she is, which upsets Thanos greatly. Oh, cut back from there to Pip again, explaining how he and Gamora and Adam Warlock came back to life. So at the bottom of the ravine where the truck crashed with those three scumbags, the three bodies essentially just kind of wake up. Only they're not the scumbags anymore. They've been inhabited by the souls of Pip and Gamora and Warlock. Pip is a little put out because the body that he took up turned out to get like flame broiled. And he's just like a charred mess. And the leader of the group, who doesn't get named or anything, I mean, none of them really get named at this point, but it's Adam Warlock, tells him, it's all right, I've cast some spells that will heal these bodies and transform them into ones that, we can use. So it's going to make them look more like Pip, Gamora, Warlock. Warlock rents them a motel room because he's the one who looks like fairly normal, at least. Pip looks like a zombie, and Gamora's body is turning green, which he's kind of happy about. So back in Death's fortress, which looks more than a little like Castle Grayskull, I'm all right with that. Thanos is still following Death around and trying, hey, baby, come on, don't be mad. I had to get that power. If I didn't, then I just would have been your servant. And then I never could have been where I wanted to be, which was your husband, your consort. You need an equal for that. That's why I did this. And her lackey explains to Thanos, it's been explained before, but again, it bears reiteration that Thanos did not become her equal. Thanos became her superior, her far superior. And seeing as how that was a position that he was unhappy in and sought to elevate himself as quickly as possible, he should probably understand where she's coming from in this case. And he doesn't, of course, because he's a narcissist. All he sees are his wants. And, he tries to couch it in terms that will sound good to her, like, I'm doing this all for your glory. But he refuses to just take no for an answer. And her avatar here, her mouthpiece, says, Mistress Death has no need for sycophants. And Thanos goes, bullshit! Everybody should be Death's sycophant. Shrines should be built to her. And then that gives him an idea. So, and I mean, if Thanos gets an idea, he can make it happen instantly. Cool close-up on his eyes as, the light goes on. And another cool 2-page splash. So this is the Shrine to Death that Thanos builds in the cosmos, where he and Death will theoretically sit and preside over the fate of the universe, really. And it's a pretty incredible 2 pages. There's a lot of nice design going on, and George does not skimp on the detail. And hey, right in the middle of the book, too. So, there you go. Put that up on your wall. And Thanos conjures a couple of thrones for them to sit in at the head of the table of the universe. And says, hey, baby, look at the nice house I got you. Now aren't you happy? Don't you want to sit with me and just, enjoy this great life we've got ahead of us? And, she doesn't, because you can't buy Death's affections. Which kind of blows Thanos' mind, and then Mephisto gets in his ear, because Mephisto's acting as Thanos' advisor in this case. Which seems like a bad idea. And Mephisto talks about how Death is a dark spirit. She's evil, she's depraved, and her mate has to be the same thing. So maybe you need to prove to her that you're like that. And Thanos doesn't like his tone too much. So he's like, am I not Thanos? Did I not butcher the woman who gave me birth? Is not the wake of my passing crimson with the blood of my enemies and allies alike? My every moment is spent in either dealing out death or worshipping it. And Mephisto's basically just like, don't tell me, man, tell her. So that inspires Thanos again to conjure up Nebula. So Nebula was a space alien pirate kind of thing, who at least claimed to be the granddaughter of Thanos. And after Thanos acquired the Infinity Stones, he paid her a visit, and he wasn't too pleased with her. And apparently the big problem he has with Nebula is the claim of her being his granddaughter, because that would imply that Thanos had children. And the idea that Thanos, who loves death, would create life was, extremely offensive to him. So he basically fried her on the spot. One of her, subordinate pirates saved her life, at least for a moment. Thanos found out and, eliminated that guy immediately. And then he kind of kept her perpetually in that state. Kind of just her flesh constantly charred, her mind pretty much gone, just teetering on the edge between life and death. She's just this barely living husk. And he presents this to Death as his living tribute to the blasphemy of life and the glorious promise of death. And he thinks that was a pretty good one. He grins all the way through his presentation. And at the end of it, of course, Death turns away again, which pisses Thanos off severely. And her mouthpiece explains that, man, Death just finds you crass. So Thanos deals with the mouthpiece same way he dealt with her last mouthpiece, by exploding it. This time significantly less bloody than last time, but this time isn't a direct market only prestige edition kind of thing. This one's going out to everybody, so you gotta tone it down a little bit. And Thanos goes on a little bit of a rampage. He's like, I have done everything for you, and you still won't even talk to me. You still use these fucking little servants to talk for you. I am your husband. What have I done to deserve such rejection? And Mephisto gets in his ear again, and he's like, maybe it's not what you have done, but what you haven't. And that kind of clicks for Thanos, like, oh shit, you're right. How stupid of me. I promised to kill half of all life in the universe, and then I gained ultimate power, and then I didn't do that. No wonder you're mad. I'm so sorry, my love. And at the mention of that original mission, Death turns around like, what? Like, even she has to take notice. And Thanos says a lover should always follow through on a vow given. And then walks away to the edge of the shrine. And this is one of my favorite panels, I think, ever. Where, Thanos gets ready to do the snap. And Mephisto's like, he's really going to do it. And that's verbatim. And we close in on Thanos' fingers as he delivers the snap. This is one thing that bugs me a little bit about the MCU movies, is that it gets to a point where the Avengers are all trying to first keep Thanos from getting the Infinity Gauntlet, and then trying to keep him from snapping. Like, you have to snap your fingers to wipe out half of all life in the universe. It's like, no, that's not how the Infinity Stones work. Thanos was just making a grand gesture. He's showing off for Death, and he wants to make sure she takes notice. This isn't something he's going to do silently or, still. He's going to make it a big flamboyant thing. So does the snap, the gems all flash, and we turn back to Earth. And the first guy we're going to visit in with is Spider-Man, which is, I think, a good choice if you want to pick like an everyman kind of guy, right? Again, nice transition. I like these blank vertical panels. We're seeing a few of these. Spidey's swinging through New York when all of a sudden he starts to get dizzy. He latches onto a building and his spider sense explodes, essentially. And he looks down at the street to see what the problem could be. And man, that must have taken a while. I don't think this isn't a photo. I'm pretty sure this is a drawing. And then even this shot, with all the fucking pedestrians and like the storefront, all the cars. Man, there's a lot of drawing on this page. Like, no wonder you kind of left that panel as negative space. It's like, no, I need to move on. And as he's looking at the crowd, half of them just flat out vanish. You get like the exact same shot, just less people. And Spidey, of course, freaks out and heads home, hoping that Mary Jane is there. Because naturally, that's the first place his mind would go. From there, we transition to Captain America. Incredible transition. That is so nice and designy. And Captain America is at the Avengers HQ, and it's a quiet night at HQ. So he's just kind of, wandering the halls. We get some like shots on the walls of old teams. That's nice. And he comes by one of the monitoring stations where Hawkeye and Cersei are just hanging out. Cersei hands him a file, and then her and Hawkeye disappear. Captain America tries to grab them, but reaches right through them and, lands on the floor and has an intuition that this is only the beginning of this particular problem. Cut from there to S.H.I.E.L.D. HQ. Another nice transition with the shot of it in space and then melting into Nick Fury lighting up a cigar. Naturally. Nick's getting a report from one of his agents about this thing going on where half of the population of the Earth suddenly disappeared, and they have no idea what it is. And that pisses him off particularly because, they're the big super spy organization and they got nothing. Cut from there to Smilin' Stan's Bar and Grill, where there's a report on that about the disappearances, where we find out it's not just human life that has been affected like this. All animal life has also been halved. And the Hulk has heard enough, smashes the TV, and decides he better look into this. And he's going to start by apparently investigating the Abomination. I don't think that really goes anywhere. There is like a two-parter that's kind of tied into the Infinity Gauntlet a little bit, where a tiny shrunken down Hulk kind of eavesdrops on and advises the Abomination. It's an interesting little story, but it doesn't really go anywhere, really. So from there, quick 3-panel sequence where we cut to the Skrull Empire, where they are experiencing something similar, and naturally what they do is they blame the Kree. And they're going to launch an all-out offensive against their, centuries-old rivals. Back to Doctor Strange and the Silver Surfer at Strange's house. Another nice transition. It just doesn't stop. So nice and designy. Where Surfer can feel all the souls that are being wiped out, blink out one by one. And then Wong starts to vanish in front of Doctor Strange's eyes. So that gets him personally invested. And Surfer is freaking the fuck out in Doctor Strange's face. Cut from there to Titan, the moon, outside of Saturn, where Eros Thanos' brother, is hanging out with his father Mentor and Firelord. Drax is also there, watching Alf, apparently. And Eros is introducing Firelord to Mentor and offering his service. Mentor's like, yeah, you bet. It'd be nice to have you, son. And then Mentor disappears, which sends Drax over the edge for a second until they get confirmation that this isn't just, in this room. This is everywhere, including all over Titan. And we end this sequence with this awesome shot of Thanos and, all the shadow melding off into space and the big flashing eyes. That's amazing stuff. Looks so good. And then we're going to end back at the motel where Pip and Gamora are slowly transforming into their regular forms. Pip's happy he no longer looks like a zombie, but then Gamora starts to disappear. Pip runs off to try and get Adam Warlock, but he finds that Warlock has cocooned himself, which I think he's done once or twice before this. And that's where this particular issue is going to end. But, the art in this thing is fucking incredible. I've been noticing, the amount of backgrounds that's going on. The stuff in Avengers HQ here, where he's just throwing in all sorts of computer detail. All the detail in the bar here. All the stuff in Doctor Strange's house. This stuff on Titan here as well. He's kind of come up with all sorts of new designs on everything that differ from each other. And just, like I said, George Perez not holding anything back. What a coup getting him for this. So that is it for Infinity Gauntlet number 1. Really, in terms of events, a very slow build. A fair amount of backstory, a fair amount of posturing from Thanos, eventually building up to the snap, and then the immediate ramifications of that snap. In terms of the story, it's okay. It is interesting to sit with this, horrible fucking creature that's all of a sudden got supreme power and build up to his progression where he gladly wipes out half the universe. But, there really isn't a whole lot going on. So this might not have been the biggest of deals had the art not been fucking spectacular, which it is. And as good as it was, if I recall, issue 2 is actually better. I think he ramps it up. So we're going to check that out next week. But for this one anyway, that's going to do it. So thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notifications so you know when the next one's coming out. Go over and subscribe on my Patreon. It gives you early access to everything I do, from the Blood Force stuff to the YouTube videos before they get uploaded to YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions, and you can join the Blood Force Discord server. But that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.